Hello everyone, my name is YuppTV. I'm the group editor at Y Media and welcome to Channel Y and Y+. Today we're going to talk about the Conservative leadership race. As much as the Conservative leadership race in Canada is important, but we are also having another Conservative leadership race which is going to be very interesting for a very simple reason. Whoever becomes the next leader of the Conservative Party in England, he is going to become the next Prime Minister. And the race has been cut down to just two members now, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Of course, many of the surveys have come out, some pointing towards Rishi Sunak and some pointing towards Liz Truss. What are the strengths? We'll talk today. And what are the chances of Rishi Sunak becoming the Prime Minister of England, the first Indian origin who could be becoming the Prime Minister or the leading representative of any major countries. We've seen many Indian origin representatives making it big in states, Australia, England, Canada, New Zealand. But the maximum level they have attained is being the cabinet minister. But here is Rishi Sunak almost on the verge of becoming the Prime Minister of England. So to talk more on this editor's take, we have Ramona Singh with us. Ramona ji, a very warm welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. It all started with the almost 11 candidates. They dropped down to 8 and then now 6, 5, 4, 3. The last two of them, the leader would be announced on 5th of September. Just to take you through to the process, the last two candidates remaining, they will be voted by approximately 180,000 card-carrying Conservative members of the Tories in England we're talking. And after this voting is done, the leader will be announced on 5th of September. Ramona ji, what's your take on this whole story, first of all?
Well, I think that, Boris Johnson has officially resigned and he's going to be replaced, and his last day in office is going to be September 6th. And then there's going to be a new prime minister. It's interesting for people who are wondering if there's going to be an election to have a new prime minister, like a general election. And no, you don't need to have a general election if the cabinet, in his case, the Conservative caucus had, essentially he did pass, Boris Johnson did pass the no confidence vote not too long ago, but Rishi Sunak, who led the way in his resignation, and then multiple other ministers resignated, and then junior ministers were resigning from cabinet, and at a point where you had Prime Minister Boris Johnson, appointing new people, but at what point are you going to keep appointing people when you don't have that much of a caucus, and when that many of your caucus members are against you, resigning, saying we do not see your leadership as a viable option, then you have to go. So now you have these final two, and I would have to say, because Rishi Sunak was one of the first people to resign, many people look at him as the way he led the charge into what this election is. And for the supporters of Boris Johnson, that could create a problem for him, because they're seeing that, Boris Johnson, he won with a supermajority in England, and in the UK, he led through, COVID measures. He got the vaccination rollout, which was important to them, because at some point their cases were through the roof in terms of their waves. It was nothing comparable to what we were going through here in Canada. And then, of course, Boris Johnson was the biggest supporter for Ukraine and the war that's been devastating Ukraine by Russian forces since, February 24th. And so here you have somebody who's been able to navigate through the economic turmoils, through a war that's just in their backyard, through COVID and making sure it rolls out. And the way they even roll it out, by making sure the elderly and the people, who are most vulnerable get it, and then getting things back on track in a way. And, and then you have him having to resign. So there is going to be obviously that in terms of what's the trust factor for Rishi, even though in the 5 ballots, he came in number 1 with his own MPs. But now you're going to go out to the, like you said, 180,000 Conservative members. And how will they think about you? So recently, just earlier today, he was doing a speech in Margaret Thatcher's backyard in her home riding, and he called himself the underdog. So he's now understanding, and that's why his slogan is "Ready for Rishi." Doesn't mean ready for Indian origin prime minister, because it's never happened before, and he's the closest. This is the height of his career right now. To be there and almost a prime minister just weeks away. And so ready for Rishi would mean, are you ready for this? He's calling himself the underdog because Liz Truss has, the way they're doing their social media is different, their messaging is different. She's showing herself as a stateswoman who's had, her as a foreign secretary has had experience in, dealing with other countries. Her successes under that. And the important thing is that she wants to show that after Brexit, that the United Kingdom can have these relationships, bilateral relationships, trade relationships with other countries, because when you pull out of the European Union, well, you're losing a lot of that privilege that was there. But she's also gone on saying that she's going to get rid of any of the EU laws by next year that would prevent growth. Sunak is saying he's going to stay with consistent on taxes because he wants to balance the books. She's saying, I'm going to do tax cuts because I want to make sure we're able to get past this inflation. Totally different messages, and it's going to be interesting on what resonates.
Yeah, you're right. The messaging is different, but just to pick a point on Boris Johnson, you're right. I mean, he did steer the country out of these tough COVID times, the economy and other things as well. And I think he was a fun prime minister as well. Most of them liked him. But then it got to a point with all those allegations, the garden parties and all those things, that yes, the character of a prime minister that was being questioned. Precisely that's the reason whether it was Sajid Javid or Liz Truss or even Rishi Sunak, as you rightly said so. And yes, Boris Johnson, in part, he is blaming Rishi Sunak because he stood with Boris Johnson for quite some time, but then eventually he knew that yes, things are getting from bad to worse. And I think as much as we would expect Boris Johnson to stay above the fray, but the point being, Boris Johnson, we've seen him during the Brexit times and even earlier as well. I mean, he's a character, and I'm sure he's going to back someone or the other, and most likely he would back anybody else but Rishi Sunak. So this is Boris Johnson for you. But then there's another question. Does he really matter at this point? Why? Because yes, the MPs, the major caucus is in favor of Rishi Sunak, but now it boils down to, out of those card-carrying conservatives, 180,000, where do they vote now, and how much of a sway would Boris Johnson have? That's the key question. That's point number one. Second, as you rightly mentioned, these are two separate messages. Liz Truss, a very different message from Liz Truss, and a very different message from Rishi Sunak. Just for a viewer's benefit, to give you a little bit of a background, Liz Truss, I think she has her own strengths and her own issues, as much as we all agree. And most of the articles that I've read in different print, and some of the print editors, they've openly, supporting her, and they're saying, yes, we are for her. They are endorsing her in all ways. She's charismatic. She's the right leader for us. And she, toes the line of conservative ideology as well. Lower taxes, as Rishi Sunak is saying, he's not going to cut on the taxes because inflation numbers are high. Maybe we'll look at cutting taxes later on, but right now he's not about tax cuts. And here you have, Liz Truss, she's ready to cut the taxes. But I think she's had her fair share of controversies as well. The most important being, as much as this may or may not really play, she might have seen the back of this controversy. But yes, she had an affair with one of her colleagues, as a member of parliament, and eventually one of the marriages also broke. But then many of her statements became controversial while she was, an elected representative or even the cabinet minister for that matter. She's done reasonably okay, I would say okay, as a foreign secretary. She went to India as well. I was watching that tour as well. Didn't do any wonders for her. So I think overall, her track record, Liz Truss, it has her own share of controversies and of course some advantage as well. What's your take on Liz Truss in particular?
I think that when it comes to her messaging, she's presenting herself in a way as somebody who's going to not only follow through with Brexit, which is what the people of the UK voted for in the last election. Because here's the interesting thing. Now you have this entire election taking place, and they're talking about policies that didn't work. Meanwhile, no. Boris Johnson is no longer prime minister, I mean, soon to be no longer prime minister because of his own actions in terms of, what they said were his behavior as a way that's not prime ministerial, not because of the policies he ran a campaign on and got a supermajority. So I think it's, in a way, it's interesting how the conversation has changed about what Boris Johnson has done in terms of wrong on policy. And that needs to be taken a look at. And in a time where you have 9.4% inflation in a country, it's a 40-year high. Things have always been expensive in the United Kingdom. I used to live in the United Kingdom. When I used to live there, Boris Johnson was actually the mayor of London. I used to live in the city of London. And it's already so expensive to be there, and now you have this inflation, and what may happen with a war next door, and perhaps what she's pointing out, Liz Truss, is that Rishi Sunak's maybe out of touch when he's talking about keeping taxes high to balance the books, because everybody is in debt, but Rishi Sunak is very wealthy, and he's part of the elite, is how he's being considered. Does he understand what it means that you can't afford to buy groceries or to be able to pay for petrol, as they would call it in the United Kingdom, or to be able to do day-to-day things, to be able to afford a roof over your head? These are perhaps things that he may not be able to comprehend according to the messaging that's being put out there, because he's married into a lot of wealth. We're talking about billion-dollar status. And if we're going to talk about personal things, well, his wife was recently in the news for, somewhat of a tax evasion in terms of her residency, and because of the bracket she would fall under and the amount of taxes she would have to pay. So guess what? Even though there isn't a first lady per se in the United Kingdom, like there isn't in Canada, like there is in the United States, because they don't have an official role or the office of a first lady, but you're going to be a big part of what this means for the family, and it's also very important in terms of where just basic things like that. And I don't think the average person, also given this whole thing when it comes to personal stuff, cares about it. I would have to say, look at when it comes to Rob Ford. Right, Rob Ford, when he was mayor of the city of Toronto, there was a lot of eruptions, with councillors. But the average people who voted him in, and he decided to not seek re-election because he was sick with cancer and he wasn't able to go ahead, but they would have voted him. And the amount of love and admiration that came from Ford Nation, which then translated onto his brother to help him position himself in his future political career. So what we've seen consistently is that people don't actually, if you're doing a good job, people understand maybe your home life might not be so well, or maybe some personal decisions you've taken might not, be ideal, but you're doing a good job and you're a human being at the end of the day. And that's why it makes me wonder, how many supporters does Boris Johnson have within the Conservative Party who voted him in, the general public voted him in, and now you had a bunch of MPs who decided, especially with the Chancellor, decided to resign, and then started a whole, domino effect of when one domino falls and then they all fall, and in a way orchestrated this election in the middle of a war, in the middle of high inflation, in the middle of so much uncertainty, where they're talking about if Russia cuts off energy supply, and there's going to be some European countries that may not have access to it in the winter months coming ahead. Like, there's a lot of things happening right now, and so and then even some of the experts have talked about Rishi's social media, saying that the videos are very on point, very professional, very intentional, and they're all like, this looks like this was a production in the making for some time. They're like, no, we just came up with it 24 hours ago when Boris Johnson resigned and we had to throw our hat in the race. There's a difference between, did you cause the race, or did you rise to the occasion of putting yourself in because your party's going through a crisis, and therefore because your party is the governing party, then the country's in a crisis? So perhaps Liz Truss can say, I put myself in because we're in a crisis, and then the question begs, Rishi, did you create this crisis and then position yourself to run for? And so that's those are the challenges he's going to have to overcome as well, and also to be taken as the everyman. Do you understand what the people of the UK are going through? Do you understand the membership? And that's why, as he says, I'm the underdog. And that's probably the right messaging, because everybody likes an underdog. Everybody likes to cheer on an underdog and see that, history of like Rocky, right? Rocky, trying really hard to make it. It's that whole, and so he's got the right messaging for sure in that sense. Let's see if he's going to be able to get the votes he needs.
Yeah. Very interesting points that you brought up. And let's talk on the inflation first. Yeah, as much as the inflation numbers are high, and I think they're going to be even higher for the next few months in UK. We all know that. And it's not just higher in UK; it's higher in Australia, Canada, States. One of the record, India, Pakistan. Pakistan, their inflation is through the roof. Sri Lanka, we know, it has its own crisis. Anyways. But how do you tame the inflation? Maybe you want to cut the tax right now, but look at the billions of pounds debt that they're accumulating. Who is going to take care of the debt which UK has accumulated? That's point number one. I don't think so, since I've been as a journalist, I can't even recall. I mean, maybe after the Second World War, UK might have accumulated this sort of debt, but they haven't done that. Depending upon who you ask, they're the fourth or the fifth biggest economy. Some are saying India is ahead of UK, some are saying no, they're behind. Anyways, but they're in the top 5 now. The fourth or the fifth biggest economy. You cannot have that sort of debt carrying on for a very long time. And the debates that I have listened, though I haven't listened to all of them, but the debate that I listen, Liz Truss, she doesn't sound she doesn't have that conviction, that how she's going to tackle this economy. So, and I'm just tempted to bring the cricket analogy here. This is Britain. We're talking the place of Lords and Edgbaston and all those cricket grounds. I think Rishi Sunak, he's already faced all that bodyline bowling. He's already faced that. He's there now. So I think that could be an advantage to him. Now talking about his wife's stuff, you're right. You said that right. The personal things may or may not matter. If personal things had to matter, I think Liz Truss has more striking personal controversies. I mean, this is a thing of I won't say a routine, but yes, very commonly the elected representative, they have marital affairs outside their marriages. But she had one, and the marriage was broken. And then there are many web series also made, and one web series, I'm not sure, I'm not linking them, but many web series loosely based on all these things. So she has more controversies than Rishi Sunak has. And then, and she has direct controversies, Rishi Sunak's wife, and then there wasn't anything unlawful. There wasn't anything unlawful about what Rishi Sunak's wife did that, and they've changed now. They've changed the status, and many of them. And yeah, Rishi Sunak, he has his own bit of a controversy when he was holding the green card as well, and that's being questioned as well. You're right, but then there are many in Britain. They have, dual passports because it's legally allowed. But here you are as a finance minister, and then you have a green card. Yes, people will ask you questions on your green card, why you're holding it. And you're right till that extent as well that yes, he's an elitist. I mean, his wife herself, she has more, net assets, maybe $800 billion than the Queen herself. So are you really in tune with the way inflation is going on? That question is being asked. You said about the video. Video, I think, yes, nobody can be sure. I tried to research on that one, his video, but nobody's sure whether it was made 5 months ago or it has been made.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's just you're the cause of what the country's going through right now. You're the cause.
No, but what they're saying is we cannot support the character of a prime minister. I mean, he's a
That's what the MP said. That's not what the country said.
No, I'm saying but then the Conservative Party has a reputation to take care. I mean, how long can as much as I would agree, right? I mean, and you know it better than me, and I'll take your word for that.
Look at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. How many scandals has he had?
Yeah.
How many things, like, even forget scandals, how many missteps have there been? So many, but his caucus is not revolting against him, because if they did tomorrow, he seems to understand how to keep a good iron fist when it comes to his caucus. We saw that happen to Erin O'Toole here, where his caucus voted him out. You need to have your caucus relations, and it's definitely Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has a hold on the Liberal Party, because I mean, I could just list 10 missteps, and that's missteps that, that could have been prevented. Oh my goodness, and then scandals, a whole nother chapter. But here you have something, and then when it comes to tax evasion, here's the problem with tax evasion. Government has money to spend on programs and services for their country, through taxes. A government is not a business where through a service or a product that they put out there, they have profits, and then they decide what they want to do with their profits. No, literally the survival of government in its entirety is based on taxes. So how could you be in a position where you are running for the top job? Don't tell me that you ran as an MP without the ambition of becoming a leader one day, and then of making that leadership into becoming a prime minister one day. So if you have those ambitions and you're smart enough to go through school and you're smart enough to learn how to communicate and you're smart enough to go through this, you should be smart enough to know that people who evade taxes are frowned upon, especially when you're supposed to lead by example and not the opposite, saying, oh, well, we want to keep our money because we're elite and we don't necessarily want to give it to the government, who then in return will spend it on roads, bridges, hospitals, nurses, paramedics, police officers, teachers, everything in between, healthcare, security, national defense. You list it, you name it. Comes from your tax dollars, right? So to say, I didn't do anything illegal. Yeah, it's not illegal. That's why it's called tax avoidance, because it's not illegal. You didn't actually put fraud on your papers, but you knew enough to know what you're doing to avoid these taxes. Meanwhile, your family is trying to become the first family of the country that relies on how you're going to spend tax dollars. You're telling people, I'm going to leave the taxes increased because we need to pay our debt. Why don't you guys pay your taxes first to the level that needs to because of your net worth? Why don't you pay that first and then talk about to everybody else about how you should keep it raised so you can balance the books and have a beautiful title that I balance the books in a recession that's around the corner.
Yeah, no, I'm all up for that. But will the Conservatives care? That's the key question.
Conservatives care, yeah. Of course they care.
No,
regardless if you're a conservative or not, you're still a human being in this unaffordability crisis. Doesn't matter. You could carry multiple cards. How much do eggs cost? How much does milk cost? How much does diapers cost? Those things, how much does petrol cost to get you to your job, to take your kids to school, because, you live somewhere where there's public transportation isn't, available, or it's not possible, whatever the reason is. But, so it doesn't matter what you identify as politically. The same experience you're having, so is your neighbor is having it. So the very few, such as the billionaire status, perhaps in Rishi Sunak's family's case, perhaps they don't feel it. Yes, I'm sure the bottom line is a bit tight for whatever businesses that they run, and because maybe the consumers are Netflix. Look at Netflix, who they were doing so well. I'm talking about when it comes to business. They're losing millions of subscribers. Their numbers are down. Every tech company's numbers are down. They're firing people. So yes, I'm sure it's affected their family, even with their net worth. But we're talking about people not being able to afford to survive. We're not even talking about luxury items at this point. So I don't think it makes a difference if you're a conservative, a non-conservative, you're a human being, you're trying to get by.
No, the point I was trying to make was that do the Conservatives, the card-carrying members, do they care more about what? That was my question.
What?
They have to see, yes, as much as the green card issue is a very important issue, the wife issue is a very important issue. Yes, there could be other, is he an elitist, or these are very important issues, and these are the challenges Rishi Sunak will face. But do they care about this thing more, or do the Conservatives care about another aspect which goes in Rishi Sunak's favor now? These 3 points are, of course, his challenge, and there are other challenges as well with Rishi Sunak. The points that go in his favor, that during the tough COVID times, he was, as the finance minister, he did amazingly well. And he did steer clear the British economy, and now they are looking upon that he's clearly said this, I am here first to tame the inflation. That's his strong point. Here you have Liz Truss, because everyone is hit by inflation. So do they care more about these issues, or do they care more about the inflation numbers and the economics? Because economics is going to dictate where the country will head. So if they're caring more about economics, most of the editorials that I have read, I could be wrong, but most of the editorials that I've read, they said, yes, on economics, yes, if they care more about economics, then Rishi Sunak stands a better chance. And you're right, as you said earlier, Rishi Sunak does understand the YouGov survey. Yes, Liz Truss is ahead of that. But then there are 2 other surveys, because eventually in 2 years' time, we're going to have another election. They've been in power for 12 years now, and 12 years is a long time. Tories can't remain in power forever. But then if you got to defeat the Labour Party, there are 2 other poll surveys which said Rishi Sunak is one of the best candidates positioned as a leader that he could be defeating the Labour Party once again. So these are the things that are going in his favor, and you're right, as much as the Conservatives or anybody else, they'll all focus on economics. The other survey which highlighted, okay, why you're picking, when the next question was asked, why you're picking Rishi Sunak as the best candidate to defeat the Labour Party. He's behind within party side of the YouGov survey, that he's behind. The main point that they cared was, most of the guys, they said, yeah, for better economics. He was a good finance minister. He's a better manager of the finance. So that is the reason. There were two other reasons as well. One was this that he, as I was saying, the integrity, because his integrity, despite the scandals, the green card and his wife issue, but integrity. Because when they look at the other people, he could be relatively, his integrity is stronger relatively, I'm saying that. So that was another part. But I think his main strength lies in the economics. But then you have Liz Truss, having her share of supporting articles and great support that she's receiving. And most importantly, what actually boils down to is the 180,000, Conservative card-carrying members. And poll numbers are indicating as of now, they are more in favor of Liz Truss right now.
Yeah, all good points. When it comes to taming inflation, that is the Bank of England's job in terms of what they're doing by increasing their key interest rate and how they're going to be able to get to tame inflation. And that's something the government, no MP, no Prime Minister, can actually tell the Bank of England what to do. And so that's a separate organization on its own entity that it's, and it's up to them. Now, there are tools that the Prime Minister and the governing party will have at their disposal of what to do in terms of being able to navigate around this uncertain times with a recession around the corner. But I do believe that as coming off COVID-19 and what people had experienced with stay-at-home mandates and whether they lost their jobs, whether they're able to work from home, or whether they were in the service industry and there isn't a work from home possibility because you can't be in the service industry over the internet. And as aid packages were sent out to people to be able to get through those times because it was a government mandate, I think that there is a feeling that and we all know that inflation is as a result of COVID. It's not just something that just happened. We were able to, go without a recession for so long. 2008 was the last recession, and there was shocks that 2018 came around, because usually after a decade there's a recession, and now there's a prediction that because of inflation we're going to go, and if they increase the rate, the interest rate very quickly in a very short period of time, it will lead to inflation trying to get to the 3 to 4%, looking back in history. So the main issue here is that I think people are going to look for affordability because they got it 2020, 2021, 2022, you're trying to get back to life to normal. So I think that you're going to look at government. You're not thinking, how are you going to balance the books? Because at some point we want to make sure. Bank of England's got that. Okay, that's what they're supposed to do. What are you guys going to do? You guys are controlling taxes. You guys are controlling whether it's a carbon tax, whether it's this tax, that tax. There's a TV tax. Did you know there's a TV license tax in the UK? Yeah, you need to pay your TV license tax to have TV, access to cable. There's taxes. If you want to go into central London, you got to pay the fee to be able to go into it because it's the zone is a congestion zone. There's congestion charges. There's all kinds of taxes for so many things. So where is there relief? And Liz Truss has put out, and it sounds like I'm a supporter of Liz Truss, and I'm not a supporter of either one, but I'm just really pointing out the two things, is that she's put out, said, with the tax breaks that I can give you, it'll cost the government $38 billion. We can afford that. She's put some numbers together. She's shown a process. So you have two different positions of what's happening. And I'll tell you something about England. Lots of people they can't even afford to live in London. They may work in London, but they live much further in the outskirts. And so affordability is such a massive thing. So I think how we've been conditioned during COVID and the level of responsibility the government took, yes, it led us to here, but we're not going to say, oh, let's all just starve and go through what could be the worst time ahead, as that's what we're hearing in the news. We're seeing when do you go into a grocery store and not see the shelves full? Or you go into Shoppers Drug Mart, in their case they go into Boots, which is their Shoppers Drug Mart version, and you don't see the shelves are full. We've seen that now for some time. There's supply issues. You want to get a new car. You can't get a new car. that's why cars are getting hijacked, because used cars have higher value because of the chip shortage. There's so many different changes right now. The last thing people want is to listen to a billionaire talk about how he's going to balance the books when you are already feeling things are hard right now, and if a recession's around the corner, things are only going to get back to normal. The Bank of Canada is predicting that inflation would come down to even 3% mark at the end of 2023. Now, I don't know what the Bank of England is telling them, but it's not something that's going to be resolved in eight weeks or 8 months. We're talking about well into the future, that by the time you make it to 2024, if you haven't lost your home, if you haven't lost your assets, if you haven't, if you're running a business, most businesses are gone during a recession, because if you don't have cash flow, if you haven't balanced, it's just going to wash you right out. And why am I talking about businesses? Because that's what creates jobs. You either work for somebody or you're running a business and you're employing people. Otherwise, you're in government. Okay, that's a whole nother story. So yeah, I think that right now it's the key thing is affordability. You did talk about labor. Yes, he's come really high on his pollings on how he's going to deal with labor, but that's 2 years away. 2 years away, if she wins, she has the chance to become that, prime minister that's going to be able to get a second election. 2 years is so long in political lifespan. A week, you saw what happened. Look at Patrick Brown, perfect example. Beginning of this month, he was a leadership candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada, who's going to have that top job, and then weeks later now he's running for mayor. In 2 years, anything could happen, and that's okay. Those polls don't matter right now.
Mm-hmm. Very good points that you've made. And just to further those points. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Bank of England, they've already said that inflation could be higher for the next few months as well. And the biggest tool that Bank of England or the US Treasury, or even for that matter Bank of Canada has been using, or the European Central Bank has been using, that is to hike the interest rates. But now I'm sure you know that as well. There's a big debate going on. I mean, as much as they have this is one of the most important tools that has been discussed, but is it working enough? The answer is absolutely not. Because how much interest rates would you raise to bring the inflation target from 8% to 2%? That's the question number one. Second question being asked is, do you really want to set the inflation target at 2%? Why not at 4%? There's another question being asked. So Bank of England could do certain things, the European Central Bank could do certain things, the US or the Canadian Bank of Canada could do certain things, but how well are they working? That's point number one. So the government has much more tools at its disposal to do many things. The number one thing is England's economy, it's flatlined. India, China, Bangladesh for that matter, most of the countries have really come back on high GDP numbers. Of course, they're on the back of the negative GDP growth, and it has bounced back. That's fine. But still, India is the fastest growing economy. China's numbers have come back again, though they're also having the trillions of dollars debt. That's an issue that's being discussed in China as well. States is having its own challenges. But then how do you bring the economy back on track? And you're right, how do you get the jobs done? And most importantly, we might have our heads buried under the sand and we're not looking at the debt. But Rishi Sunak, the most important point that he's highlighting, debt. An elitist may not want to talk about debt, actually. On the contrary, an elitist may not want to talk about debt because I'm fine, everything is fine for me. And there are many, when you look at this conservative 180,000 block, 97% of them are whites. Their average age is higher, they're wealthier than a common person living in Britain. So they may not even, it's supposedly, they may not even look at the inflation numbers, or may not even look at the debt. But I think the point that Rishi Sunak is highlighting is regarding the debt. I think that definitely needs, how long can you keep on borrowing and spend? That is the point that he's making. And as much as I'm really happy, and in my perspective, these are two very competitive candidates. I'm not here to say this that Liz Truss is better or Rishi Sunak is better. In my viewpoint, I'm just presenting both sides of the story, and whoever becomes the next prime minister, there are all going to be very important changes, because you're right. The other day we were talking. States hasn't seen a female president up until now. But here you have after Margaret Thatcher, then you had Theresa May, and the third female prime minister for England, which is great in a way. Then if Rishi Sunak gets there, I mean, as far as the racial thing is concerned, there's another tick box for the Tories, as much as they still have less people. And mind you, as much as many people say, diverse representation, I'm not a strong supporter of that. My only consideration is competitiveness. Whoever is competitive, they should be given.
Competent.
Competent, yeah. Competitiveness.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Whoever is competent, if you are competent enough, that's fine. My only criteria is competence. Other than competence, there is no other criteria for me, because I listen this quite often. Equal representation, diversity. Yes, it's fine. Diversity is important. Equal representation is important in terms of racial backgrounds, in terms of gender. I'm all up for that. But right now, I think competence basically supersedes anything else for me. Please.
Yeah, great point. So here's the other thing. People want jobs, and they want to be able to trade. And that's what Liz Truss is talking about in terms of making sure that through her time as the Foreign Secretary, in terms of making trade relations after leaving the EU. And the other thing is when she said, I'm going to get rid of all the EU regulations that prevent our growth, that could be for or against her in a general election. It's to be seen with the membership base. But if you recall, you had Boris Johnson, who campaigned on Brexit, saying that the UK is sending £350 million a week sterling to the European Union, and if they were to leave, then that money would go into the national health care. And that was the biggest, because I remember that bus and the big banner on it, and you're saying, what? That's the amount of money that is sent to the European Union, and that's just because you're part of the EU. Imagine if that money, and when I used to live in England, the healthcare backlogs, like we talk about problems here in Canada, it's a whole nother story there. Like you can't even go see a doctor. Like there's none available. They're all there, if you don't have a file, you're done. And so that's the other thing. So they're looking for who's going to be able to get trade back up, get jobs in place, not just when it comes to what they're doing with taxes. Because here's the thing, the average person's happy to pay taxes as long as they have a job, and a good paying job where there is economic dignity in it. Not just any job because you have to work, but it's something that is you're meaningfully and gainfully employed. You have economic dignity. Then taxes is something you want to pay. So I think part of what Rishi's message needs to be about, how are you going to create jobs? How are you going to create an economy during this time for people after leaving the European Union, which had many of its challenges there as well, and when it comes to trade and everything else, and manpower and everything else that they were able to get from the European Union when they were a part of it. So this is all, and that's what she's talking about. She's talking about how can you have jobs? How can you afford this phase to get through and then have prosperity? So I think that you need to have a balance of the two. Look at what Ford did. Doug Ford of the PCs, with the election in June 2nd, he got even a bigger majority than the last one. What did he do? He talked about cutting taxes. He didn't say, I'm going to raise taxes on you. He cut on the sticker renewal. Yeah, it's $120. Okay, you don't have to pay for a year. He said he's going to cut taxes for people earning up to $50,000 income. That's a new thing that wasn't there before. He talked about cutting taxes. And then on top of that, he said, I'm going to spend to develop infrastructure, which means I'm going to create jobs. And that's how we're going to get the economy back. And on top of that, we're going to invest in the EVs, right? The electric vehicles, and invest back in manufacturing when it comes to all the industries for cars and all that. So not only were there those deals saying, okay, we're going to bring back manufacturing in Ontario, so there's jobs there. We're going to build highways and roads and bridges. There's jobs there. And then also, I'm going to cut taxes for the average person to make sure you can get on your feet. What happened? He got even a bigger majority. And it seems like what she's talking about is more on that line than somebody who says, I'm going to raise it because things are not good. Yeah, I know things are not going to be good later when you listen to the news, but that's okay. It's going to be better. It's a medicine. And just take the medicine that tastes so bad because you're going to be better later. Does the average person, are they able to go through that right now? Let's see. It's not the average person. It is their membership. And I don't based on what the membership thinks. And like you said, the demographics of where they are, what's their net worth. But I think at the end of the day, everyone's struggling.
Yeah, 3 points on this one. First of all, the Brexit point, Liz Truss, she did flip-flop on the Brexit thing. I'm not saying anybody can change their mind, and better get it right than, sticking to a point which you're not convinced by yourself. So I don't even really like the slogan, once a Brexiter, always a Brexiter. No. You could always change your mind, but then she flip-flopped on that one, the Brexit thing. At least Rishi Sunak stayed on one point. That's one point, clarity of thought. Second point is that yes, he's not saying I'm going to increase the taxes. All he's saying we cannot afford to cut the taxes. And then she's saying no, we're going to cut the taxes. As much as you're right that it's a conservative thing to cut the taxes, and it sits well with the conservative ideology as well. So when he was asked this question, he says, as a matter of fact, I will be cutting taxes, but maybe, at a later stage. So maybe at a later stage, he means this closer to the next election in 2 years. So he's not ready to cut the taxes right now. That's his viewpoint. And then where are you going to get the jobs? He says, yes, I want to, because, if the GDP is flatlined, you cannot expect to, get on the jobs. And then when Liz Truss says this, that I'm going to raise the GDP for our defense budget to 3% of our GDP, the defense by 3% of our GDP. Yeah, as much as we all agree, but the asking from all the NATO members is 2% of the GDP. I doubt we have even, in Canada, we don't even have 1%, but you're right, I mean, they have Russia and all those things going on. So for them, even 3% of the GDP is a relatively reasonable number, which she's saying. But this still begs the question, in these times, how are you going to manage? Are you fiscally responsible? That's the key question. You're raising your defense spending to 3% of the GDP. She's clearly highlighted that number there. So where is the growth coming from? That's what I want to know. Where are the jobs going to come from? Your GDP is flatlined right now. And how are you going to manage the debt? In case you would have said this, I'm going to invest that, and the GDP number is going to increase, the job is coming from here, I'm going to attract more investment. I was listening to the speech of Boris Johnson, his last speech probably in the parliament, as much as I listened to him about his free, and I'm a strong supporter of freedom of speech. I love that point, by the way, by Boris Johnson. Freedom of speech and other things, democratic setup and all those things. But he also mentioned a very important point. How are you going to make this country? I mean, this was his advice to his successor that he made, Boris Johnson. How are you going to make sure that this country brings in lots of investment and a great economic place to thrive? So that's the key question which has to be addressed, please.
Okay, great things. You talked about her talking. So here's the thing, when you say maybe I'm going to do, so in an election campaign, you need solid promises. No, maybe I'll do it when I feel like it, when I wake up one morning and test the waters, and then, so because you are asking people to vote for you, in their case for 2 years, because the next election is 2024, but in a general election, you're asking people for a 4-year commitment. And so your word really matters because they're buying today and their deliveries coming in the future. So they're almost prepaying. Like any service, you prepay without receiving the product or the service. You're almost hoping that there's a level of trust that what I paid for in full, that I cannot get a refund until 4 years, that you're going to give me what I saw in the advertisement. Well, that's what election campaigns are. They're a big advertisement to the public, and in this case, the membership base. You're advertising what you're going to do. So there's no maybes. There has to be definite, and that's what she's speaking. She's speaking in definite terms. And we're going to do, maybe it doesn't sound right. How are you going to put those numbers together? We're going to say there's a debate on July 25th. It's going to be the first debate with these two contenders. A lot of people speculate that she will have a hard time on the finance part, and that's his niche. But, a lot of people also say she's good at speaking to the average person, and he has so we'll see how that goes. Obviously these debates do matter in terms of them making up their mind, but when it comes to you made another point, which is when he said, how do you invite investors? What Boris Johnson said, you invite investors to a country when there's political stability. And the person who caused the political instability is a candidate running to become prime minister. Political stability is one of the key things. That's why, when Canada has political stability, it's a place where you have investors come. Even black money comes to Canada because there's this rate of return here. So, clean money, unclean money, it's all coming here because there's a climate that there's no revolution, there is stability, there's rule of law. What happened on January 6th in the US doesn't happen here. When somebody loses, they actually, comply and pass over the torch. We have stability. What they don't have right now in the middle of this chaos. I mean, how much flack did Justin Trudeau get when he called a snap election, which we all predicted he was going to for 8 months last year in the fall? We had, you're going to call an election and COVID. Oh, look, Afghanistan was just taken by, the Kabul fell because the Taliban took over. All of this, there was so much criticism on him for calling an election which we all expected way months ahead. This was overnight resignation. There's nothing more Machiavellian than what we just saw happen. Shakespeare couldn't have written a better play.
I'll sum up on this point. I mean, if you look at the history, not just Britain, but the States, Canada, Australia, India for that matter, or Pakistan for that matter, and I've heard it from you as well. Where do you find the most opposition from? Within the party?
Yeah.
Whether it was Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher. I mean, Iron Lady, she did so many, she could fight the steel unions and so many other things, but then what was the reason of her falling back? And then you had the Winston Churchill. I mean, after winning the World War, he didn't win a war. He won a World War against Nazi Germany, the Hitler, and when every other country was almost on their knees and they were proposing that it's better for you to at least make a compromise. And here comes Winston Churchill. No, we understand, and he wins the war. And what was the reason of his demise? Again, within the own party. So this thing always happens within the own party. So I'm not saying that Rishi Sunak did, but because there are again questions being raised. As much as Boris Johnson is mainly, he hasn't said that openly, and in politics you don't say that openly. But you're right. I mean, he's the one more than Sajid Javid or Liz Truss or anybody else. He's blaming mainly Rishi Sunak. But then Rishi Sunak stood by him to a point where people started blaming Rishi Sunak. Hey, everyone else is almost out. Why are you still standing with him? And then he took enough time to announce his leadership as well.
Well, that's part of the flack that he's getting. They're saying that everything you're criticizing Boris Johnson on, you were his right-hand man as the Chancellor, pretty much a finance minister. You were his right-hand person. Everything he did, it was with you right there. So how are you now criticizing him? So now that he's having to come across that, and some of his answers would be like, I supported him until I no longer could. Because he has got to explain where that difference is. You can't really, come from an opposition perspective when you're opposing something you're a big part of. There's that aspect, but also, this is going to be very interesting. But here's the thing: throughout all the different times where their own caucus took them down, you also never had a time where there was a pandemic, where the entire world was in a lockdown. And the entire world had to have this vaccine that rolled out, whether you agreed with it, whether you disagreed with it. If you didn't get vaccinated, then most countries had mandates against the people who weren't vaccinated. This was an unprecedented time where civil liberties was taken away in the name of better health, in the name of we're in it together, in the name of let's get past this, this pandemic. It was almost like what you'd see a plague, like back in the olden days, what you've read about, that, people would be devastated. So this was an unprecedented time. Then what happened was you had the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, all of them bringing down interest rates to next to nothing. The government dishing out aid packages to people, which almost doesn't happen. And then the central bank, it takes too long to get inflation under control. They wait too long to start incrementally increasing it. Now they're doing these fast, rapid increases. Then now there's a recession around the corner. And this is the age of digitalization. Back then, in all those other times, there was the industrial age, where there wasn't much, like from the 80s to the year 2010. How much evolution was there in technology? Not as much as there is right now. From 2010 onwards, it's at a rapid pace. from the 1950s, you had a VCR, and then eventually they came to Discman, then came the cassette player, then came, like, it went through such a slow, way of progression and innovation. Now we're in a time where everything's rapid. We have robots. Robots were driving cars for us. Robots were doing things for. They're robots, right? We call it artificial intelligence. We're at a time where we almost don't understand how far that's going to take us, and so many people are now they don't have the skills to be able to be in these industries. So much has changed in the way we do work, in the way we communicate with one another. More we live on the internet than we do. You have a persona on the internet and you have no persona in person. That's what we're seeing today. Somebody will have no friends in real life, will probably display no level of essence in their personality, but online they're a superstar. They have 5,000 friends and they say the funniest things. This is the world we live in. Now we have Meta, where you can go and buy real estate in this virtual world. We have virtual currency. It's a different day and age. And so you want investors, you want jobs, that comes with political stability.
Yeah. I wish we had more time, but someone just told us we're on borrowed time.
Yes.
But I'll still have you have the last word. Thank you. If you have got anything, you could say something and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to definitely keep this going, the conversation going, to make sure that we are bringing you all the latest headlines on this race. This is an election that no matter who becomes out of the two becomes the leader of the Conservative Party, they become prime minister. They don't even have to go through a general election. They just get to go through an election with 180,000 members of the Conservative members, and out of them, let's just say only 30% vote. So this is going to be a time where you can be an incumbent. This is an opportunity like no other for their careers. It's the height of their career. Even the person who loses, this is the height of their career, and hey, everybody knows them. Hey, we're talking about them, and we wish them all the best of luck. Until next time, take care and be well. Thank you so much for this editor's take as well.
Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed our today's discussion, and we'll keep you updated and posted right here on Channel Y. Keep watching Channel Y.